Wow, welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on X at Movies TV Mad and on Instagram and on Threads at Movies TV Mad X. A very warm welcome to Tuesday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. And wow, we've got some breaking news. Isn't it great when we've got some breaking news to get our knives and forks into? Yes. House of Dragons Australian actress Millie Alcock, as I told you she would be, has been cast as James Gunn's and Peter Safran's Supergirl in the brand new DC universe. She will be introduced in Superman Legacy. Then we will see her in her very own movie, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, based on a graphic novel by Tom King. Now, the reason I was very confident that Millie would get this role is because she's got that more kind of wholesome quality about her. Because the Supergirl in Tom King's graphic novel, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, is no wholesome member of the House of L. She's been on a rock for years. She's been on her own. She's angry. She's aggressive, right? It's a bit of a very different take on a different version of Supergirl. So first of all, congratulations to Millie. Now, originally, we had actually two actresses going for this role. And one was Meg Donnelly, who already has voiced Supergirl. She's a more wholesome actress and someone who would have played a more wholesome Supergirl. So she was never going to get the role. I've been convinced that Millie Alcock had already been cast as Supergirl, but they weren't ready to release that information. Right, first of all, Millie Alcock is an outstanding young actor. She was outstanding in House of Dragons. Why didn't I want her as Supergirl? Why did I have a preference for Meg Donnelly? Well, listen, I've kind of had a bit of a bad impression of Millie because last year she was asked if it was true if she didn't get on with a cast member on House of Dragons. She said it was fabricated by fans, mostly men, that's what she said, on the internet. So once she said that, I took a disliking to her. Because what I don't want from someone wearing the symbol of the House of L is hatred for men or any other corner of society. Because, Millie, once you put that symbol on, we don't want to be hearing the feminist nonsense that I'm here just to inspire women, blah, 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 blah. Supergirl is a character I have loved ever since I saw the Helen Slater 1984 movie. So I don't want to see any hatred from you. I congratulate you. Now, over on Threads, you had James Gunn and Jim Lee oozing about Millie Alcock's screen tests. Now, here's the thing. I ain't seen no screen tests. You ain't seen no screen tests. So how do you judge this casting? Comments down below. But, you know, for me, as always, the proof of the pudding is within the eating. I am happy with her casting. You know, the cast so far of DC Universe is very, very good. We can't be complaining about that cast. So, yeah, you're saying, Mick, you wanted Meg Donnelly because you didn't like one thing that Millie Alcock said. It's true. I don't want someone wearing the symbol of the House of L dividing audiences. That's where I am with this situation. But she has got the role. She is perfect for the version of Tom King's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, right? Perfect. But it's clear that they wanted this casting done and they needed to get this casting done pretty quickly because it's clear she's going to be in Superman Legacy. Now, how big her role in Superman Legacy will be, I don't know. But despite me being disappointed with her comments online about men, and it was a one-off comment, so I've got to have to let it go and say, well done, Millie, let's see what you can do. Big Supergirl fan. But, you know, for years, ever since seeing Supergirl, I've wanted to see Supergirl and Superman on screen together. We may not actually see her on screen with Superman in Superman Legacy. She could be in a post-credit scene. She could be on her own. Because how do you tell the story of Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, but have her on screen with Superman? It doesn't really make much sense, and we're going to have to be patient. We're going to have to wait and see what James Gunn says. We're going to have to actually wait for maybe trailers, but probably we won't even see her in the trailers. We'll have to wait to see her in the movie. And this is one of many reasons I'm actually very excited for James Gunn's DC Universe, because something very disappointing happened in terms of the 1984 film. You all know how much I adore Christopher Reeve. He was originally going to play a role in the Supergirl film. He was going to, show Supergirl around the planet Earth, settle her in. And then Chris phoned up Jeannot Swark, the director, and said he didn't feel comfortable about being in the film. Now, if I was in charge of that franchise, if I was the Salkinds, I would have said, Chris, get your butt on set now. You're going to be on this film. Him not being on that film kind of fucked that movie up. Now, you're going to say, Mick, but she should be able to be in a Supergirl film on her own. It should be about her. I agree. But back then, it wasn't the norm to have female leads in films. It wasn't the trend. It wasn't the thing. It wasn't necessarily what mainstream general audiences were going to run to cinemas to see. You kind of needed Superman in that movie somewhat, so that's a shame. It was great in Smallville to have Clark Kent and Kara Zor-El on screen together. It was great in Arrowverse to have Tyler Hoechlin's Superman and Mel Benoist's Supergirl on screen together. I've loved every single version of Supergirl on the small screen, as well as the Helen Slater version on the big screen. Helen Slater was great. Laura Vander Voot was great on Smallville. And Mel Benoist was a great Supergirl. And in fact, I adore her first season. But unfortunately, after it was cancelled by CBS and it went on the CW, it became very current day and the writing wasn't very strong. Mel was let down. But don't get it twisted. Mel was a great Supergirl. There'll be fans of Mel Benoist that are disappointed that she's not playing Supergirl in this iteration. But it's a bit like, saying, why isn't Michael Rosenbaum playing Lex Luthor in DC Universe? Because it's a new universe, and James wants to go with the actors he envisions as these iconic characters. That's why Henry Cavill is no longer Superman. I get it. I'm frustrated about what happened with the Snyderverse, what happened with Zack, what happened with Henry, but I don't blame James for going his own way. So we have a Supergirl, we have a huge talent as Supergirl, despite me being upset by one of her public statements, but, I'm going to go with it. I'm excited. She's a very good actor. Look, if you look at her performances in House of Dragons, they're extraordinary. She's on screen with Matt Smith, who is one of the great actors in TV and film today. So he was one of the great doctors, versions of Doctor Who as well. But she's brilliant. She is talented. So I'm not unhappy with her casting, but I just think if you had someone like Meg, you're not going to potentially get like the feminist, kind of comments and statements and nonsense like that. And I hope that James Gunn understands that. But so far with the females that have been cast, Rachel Brosnahan has been very, very lovely and warm when talking about her portrayal, her upcoming portrayal of Lois Lane. That's the kind of stuff I want to hear. Hollywood, you've got to start uniting your audiences and stop dividing your audiences. It's very important now in terms of the future of Hollywood and how it is now. In terms of WB and DC Studios, it's very important that we unite the audience. There is an opportunity here with what James Gunn is attempting to do. And James is trying to build something. Now, some of you may be excited about that. Some of you may not be excited about that. I am excited about it, despite my frustrations about what happened in the past. My frustrations are still there, but I refuse, unlike some, to take out those frustrations on James Gunn and what he's planning, because he genuinely is trying to plan something fresh, something to excite audiences. And yes, Millie Alcock is a very good choice for this version. I said it weeks ago. Despite my gut feeling saying, oh my God, I can just imagine the public statements. But apart from that, she's a very good actor. She was great in House of Dragons. And if you notice, both Meg Donnelly and Millie Alcock had worked with WB before. So they weren't looking, this wasn't really, I don't think this was an open casting call, I could be wrong. But in the end, the two finalists for this role had already worked for WB, because House of Dragons is an HBO production. HBO is owned by WB, as a lot of you, if not all of you, know. Well, you learn something new watching my content, don't you? And you will continue to learn if you listen to me. So if you don't know who she is, go and watch her in the early series of House of Dragons. I think she was recast with an older actress in the end of that series because of the story, not because of anything, I don't think, anything that Millie had done. But yes, congratulations to her. It's very, very exciting. As I say, all the casting for DC Universe at the moment, you know, is very, very good. It's exceptional. And it is exciting. We have a Supergirl. We know who's going to play Supergirl. And isn't it interesting? James Gunn could have cast a Latino Superman, a Latino Supergirl, but they're both white. And, I'm all for, a brand new version of Supergirl out there somewhere in the multiverse that may be Latin, that may be black, Asian. I'm fine with that, right? That's cool. I'm not against that. But Kara Zor-El is white. Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, is white, right? Like there's President Superman who's black. That's cool. Let's see him standing with Kal-El, right? And Val Zod is a black version of Superman, a different version of Superman from the multiverse, or from maybe even Earth 1, because he's a different version, right? Whatever. I'm not exactly that knowledgeable on these different versions, but what I'm saying is, that's great. That's great diversity. I'd love to see them all eventually line up. But yeah, these versions of Superman and Supergirl are white. And James Gunn could have gone a different way. Now, I have heard, and I think many of us have heard, they're looking for an actor of colour to play Perry White. Again, this isn't a big deal. Originally, Perry was white. I don't understand why they don't create new characters so they can be diverse, but good characters, interesting characters. Don't just have diverse people standing there saying nothing. Don't do a Pete Ross from Smallville. Pete Ross originally was white. They cast him with black actor Sam Jones III on Smallville. Now, Sam did a great job, but I was very frustrated, as many of us were, that Pete Ross didn't get much to do in Smallville. He was overshadowed by Chloe and Lana, Lex and Lionel, but he never got enough to do, which is a shame. So if you want to be diverse, don't just have them standing there, because that's insulting, and that's the very opposite of diversity. But we've got a really outstanding artist as Supergirl. I will say that, but I employ her and James Gunn to be positive. Have Supergirl be absolutely a role model for girls, but for everyone. Because it isn't just girls that have looked up to her in the past. So it's about uniting people instead of dividing people. And as I said earlier, it's very, very important now that that is exactly what happens. So yes, Millie Alcock has been cast as Supergirl. Let me know what you think. Comment down below. Are you happy with Millie's casting? Are you unhappy? Some people will say, she doesn't really exactly look like how you imagine Supergirl to be, but this is a very different Supergirl. As I say, this is a more aggressive, a more, if you like, a more kind of street level Supergirl. So she's going to be a lot more relatable, and I think Millie has got the ability to implement that in her performance. What I want to do now is go to a video from a YouTube channel, a platform called Bullets and Blockbusters, and they did this 12-minute video talking about the original plans for the Snyderverse. So we're going to give it a listen because I found it very interesting and I want us to discuss it.
After Joss Whedon took over Justice League from Zack Snyder to disastrous results, it effectively killed Snyder's vision of a unified trilogy and served as the catalyst for the eventual demise of Snyder's DC Cinematic Universe, aka the Snyderverse. So let's dive in and find out what could have been Snyder's ambitious plans for the two Justice League sequels, as well as those for the greater Snyderverse. Following Avengers Infinity War, Thanos quickly emerged as one of the all-time great movie villains. However, when it was DC's turn to team up all of their heroes and pit them against a seemingly unstoppable alien foe, to casual fans it felt like Darkseid was just a Thanos ripoff, when in fact it's the other way around. Back in the early 70s, Marvel writer Jim Starlin was inspired to create a monster villain of his own after reading DC's Fourth World, featuring Darkseid as the comic's primary antagonist. Starlin would be encouraged to then copy the look of Darkseid by his editor, who suggested, if you're going to steal one of the new gods, at least rip off Darkseid, the really good one. Fast forward to the present, and while we'd finally get to see Thanos battle the Avengers on the big screen, we'd be robbed of getting to see the DC character who inspired him, Darkseid, battle the Justice League. And while scripts for the two Justice League sequels were never written, Snyder had at least mapped out the story, even if his plans changed and evolved over time. So what would Justice League 2 have been about? Unlike Infinity War and Endgame that saw Thanos and his minions as the sole antagonists, Justice League Part 2 would have featured several antagonists teaming up as Lex Luthor forms a league of his own. And this league would have been composed of revenge-driven villains introduced in the hero's solo films, like Dr. Maru from Wonder Woman, Orm and Black Manta from Aquaman, and the Riddler from Ben Affleck's solo Batman film. As Batman and Lois work together to find Lex Luthor and put him back in jail, Batman stumbles upon the Riddler, who has gone mad after solving the anti-life equation on behalf of Luthor. The Riddler warns Batman that once Luthor unlocks it, it will mean the end of the world. Then, much to Batman's shock, the Riddler blows his brains out. Meanwhile, Darkseid arrives on Earth and teams up with Lex, who provides him with the solution to the anti-life equation before telling him that he now has the power to kill Superman. But Darkseid doesn't want him dead. He wants him to submit. So Lex explains that killing Lois Lane, who's pregnant, is the key to breaking Superman's spirit and making him succumb to the anti-life equation. It's worth explaining for anyone who isn't familiar with the anti-life equation that it's a formula that, when solved, allows the one who possesses it to control and manipulate the minds of others, stripping them of their free will and reducing them to obedient slaves. Back in the Batcave, Superman, Batman, and Lois regroup as they learn of Darkseid's arrival. Realizing that this is a fight amongst the gods, Superman tells Batman to stay put and protect Lois as he flies off and fights Darkseid. But after Superman and Darkseid lock horns, Darkseid boom tubes to Lois in the Batcave. Superman pursues, flying at incredible speeds to the Batcave, arriving just in time to watch Darkseid unleash his Omega beams from his eyes, turning Lois into ash as neither Batman nor Superman is able to save her. Superman drops to his knees in agonizing grief, but before he can recover and tear Darkseid apart, he succumbs to anti-life as Darkseid takes control of his mind. Batman looks on in horror and is barely able to escape as Superman turns on him. Elsewhere, the Justice League comes under attack from the Legion of Doom. Dr. Maru unleashes a chemical gas at the Themyscira, which kills Wonder Woman and the Amazons, while Orm and Black Manta attack Atlantis, killing Aquaman. The film then would have jumped ahead a few years as we see Batman and the surviving members of the Justice League, Flash and Cyborg, plus Mera and Deathstroke, toughing it out together in a post-apocalyptic Gotham, much like the scene Snyder shot for the Snyder Cut of Justice League. And that would have been the end of Part 2. In Snyder's original opening to Part 3, he wanted to introduce Green Lantern and have him join what's left of the League, as he comes to Earth looking for his partner, who's missing and presumed dead. For the Snyder Cut, Snyder actually partially shot a cameo featuring Wayne T. Carr as the Jon Stewart version of Green Lantern, visiting Bruce at his lake house. By this time, however, the studio had plans of their own for a Jon Stewart Green Lantern movie, and vetoed the cameo. So as a compromise, Snyder reshot the scene with Martian Manhunter. This is also a good example of how Snyder and the studio were never on the same page. Snyder kept trying to add more comic book characters and things like that into his movies, but the studio would push back as they wanted more humor instead, saying, according to Snyder, "Where are the jokes? Why are you not doing what we're asking? We're not asking for Martian Manhunter, we're asking for comedy." This also explains why Joss Whedon was eventually brought in to rewrite the Justice League, since not only was Snyder not complying with Warner Brothers' demands, but since Warner Brothers wanted the film to be lighter and funnier, it made sense for them to just bring in the guy who wrote the film they wanted Justice League to be like, Joss Whedon. Part 3 opens as the League searches for one of the mother boxes, as Cyborg plans to use it to power a cosmic treadmill he's building in what's left of the Batcave, in order to send Flash back in time to give Bruce an advantage in the fight against Darkseid, so that he can save Lois and change history. To achieve this, they have no choice but to turn to the Joker, who not only knows where they can find some kryptonite to ward off Superman, but knows the location of a mother box. The night before the Justice League plans to steal the mother box, they have what's basically a Last Supper, which turns into a confessional, as everyone tells a small personal story, since they all think they're going to die the next day. When it's the Joker's turn, he tells the story of how he killed Robin, which we would have seen through flashback. The following day, the Justice League are able to break into one of Darkseid's strongholds and steal a mother box before returning to the cave. Superman is alerted to this and pursues them, and while the League tries to use kryptonite against him, they fail, as Superman kills them off one by one, except for the Flash, who races back in time just before Superman is able to reach him. After Flash travels back in time to warn Bruce, Bruce sacrifices himself to save Lois, buying Superman more time to get to the Batcave and save her as Darkseid retreats. With Batman gone and Superman no longer succumbing to the anti-life equation, Superman becomes the leader of the Justice League and unites mankind and the armies of Earth for the upcoming showdown against Darkseid and his apocalyptic forces. Mankind would be joined by Aquaman leading the forces of Atlantis, Diana leading the Amazons, and even the Green Lantern Corps in a giant planet-wide battle, while Lex Luthor sneaks a nuke onto Darkseid's spaceship and detonates it himself, sacrificing himself and killing Darkseid in the process, as he was never down with Darkseid's plan to completely destroy mankind. The movie would have ended by skipping ahead 20 years to the anniversary of Batman's death, as Clark and Lois take their son, Bruce Kent, who never inherited his father's powers, down to the Batcave as he becomes the new Batman. It's worth noting that very early on in development, Snyder planned to have Bruce be the father of Lois's baby, with the two having hooked up after Superman's death and prior to his resurrection. Snyder modeled the subplot after war films where a soldier's wife moves on after her husband's presumed death, mourning his loss by finding solace in his best friend, only for her husband to unexpectedly return alive. Basically, this would have been identical to the love triangle in Pearl Harbor, which also starred Ben Affleck. This is also the reason Darkseid is able to kill Lois in the cave, because when he arrives, Batman's distracted, as he's in the middle of an argument with Lois. He loves her, but she's in love with Superman. When Flash eventually jumps through time from the future, he tells Bruce that he's the father, which would have given him the motivation to sacrifice himself for her, so that both her and their unborn son could survive. However, this plan was scrapped at Warner Brothers' behest, even before the filming of Justice League began, as it suggested in that film that Lois is pregnant with Clark's child. The Snyderverse, as originally imagined, was just supposed to be Man of Steel, BVS, and Snyder's Justice League trilogy, plus one side film, which ended up being Suicide Squad. But after Man of Steel, Warner Brothers decided to go all in on its cinematic universe and give each character their own trilogy. Not only that, but Snyder also pitched an Atom movie to Warner Brothers, which would have been set in China and seen Jung Kai reprise his role as Ryan Choi alongside an all-Chinese cast. While we get standalone Wonder Woman and Aquaman films following Justice League, Snyder believes we also would have got a standalone Cyborg film before Justice League Part 2 would have come out, as he felt he had put the character on his feet at the end of Justice League and was ready for his own movie. However, Ray Fisher's very public spat with Warner Brothers, where he accused Joss Whedon and the studio of racism, abuse, and discrimination during the Justice League reshoots, basically killed plans for his own standalone movie, and is also what led to Fisher's removal from the Flash film. And speaking of the Flash, not only did the script of that movie get rewritten several times, but the original plans were for the character to star in a decades-long trilogy culminating in a comic-accurate Flashpoint adaptation, which takes place in an alternate timeline where Superman never became a hero, as he was taken prisoner by the US government as a baby after a ship crash-landed in Metropolis, not Smallville. Thomas Wayne also became Batman when his son Bruce was killed by the robber instead of him and Martha, who also becomes the Joker after she goes insane mourning the loss of her son. sun. On top of that, the world is in ruins due to a war between the Amazons and Atlanteans, which started when an alliance between them collapsed after Wonder Woman killed Aquaman's wife, Mera, who had confronted her for having an affair with Aquaman. Professor Zoom, aka Reverse Flash, would have been revealed as the big bad of the DCU, as we learn that he's been pulling the strings behind the scenes all along in order to torment Barry and the rest of the Justice League. The plan was to end the film with Barry resetting the timeline, which would have rebooted the entire DCU, to allow for the introduction of an entirely new cast, since after a decade playing these characters, all of the actors would likely want to move on to other roles. However, once Warner Brothers decided to move on from the Snyderverse prematurely, they moved a Flashpoint adaptation up to the first Flash film in order to use that as a vehicle to do the reboot. So what went wrong? 3 letters, BVS. After it came out, Warner Brothers was incredibly disappointed in the film itself, its critical reception, and especially its box office performance, since a movie finally pitting Batman vs. Superman should have easily grossed more than $1 billion. And when it didn't, and Warner Brothers saw that Justice League, which began shooting a month after BVS came out, was going to be more of the same, mandated that either DC Entertainment creative chief Jeff Johns or Warner Brothers co-production head John Berg had to be on set every day to babysit and ensure Snyder was making the film lighter and funnier as the studio requested. Allegedly, it was then Jeff Johns who recruited Joss Whedon to come aboard to do the rewrites, with the idea that Snyder would still direct those rewrites. Throughout all of this, Snyder remained positive, saying, "I thought maybe Whedon could write some cool scenes." However, Warner Brothers began giving Whedon more and more power as he began directing some of the scenes he rewrote himself. While all this was happening, Snyder's daughter tragically died, and as Snyder tried to juggle grieving her death and fighting Warner Brothers to maintain his vision of the film, he lost the will to fight them, as he realized it was a losing battle, and so decided to step down. However, with Whedon assuming more and more control, reports suggested that Snyder was actually fired, or at least was about to be. Regardless, Snyder leaving the film spelled the end of his plans for his Justice League trilogy and greater cinematic universe, as Warner Brothers would take everything in a totally different direction from here on out. The Snyderverse remains incredibly divisive amongst fans, with most either loving it or hating it, which is why I hesitate to call it a missed opportunity, since I feel half the fans out there watching this video probably view its cancellation as a dodged bullet. Yet, regardless of your feelings towards the Snyderverse, I think most of us can at least agree that Henry Cavill probably got the shortest end of the stick here, as not only were plans for a proper Man of Steel sequel scrapped in favor of BVS and Justice League, but with the 2 Justice League sequels also scrapped, he was deprived of getting to have the biggest arc out of anyone in the DCU. Snyder would elaborate on this, saying, "I think traditionally Superman is one of those characters that people don't see as changing a lot, and I just thought, how cool would it be to make our Superman the character that goes on the most incredible journey, going from this kind of berserker Superman under the spell of Darkseid to a benevolent Superman that's head of the Justice League and the armies of men." If you're interested in learning more about what Man of Steel 2 or Ben Affleck's solo Batman film would have been about, we already made videos on both of those, so to watch them, just wait for the links on the end screen, which is coming right up. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
I want to personally thank Bullets and Blockbusters for that outstanding movie. You should go right ahead and subscribe to that channel. No, I'm not making any money. I have no connection to that channel. I promise I'm not that guy. But their content is brilliant. And if you want to be informed, and there's a video about what happened, what went wrong with Man of Steel 2 and stuff like that, get into it. As you saw me listening to the audio of that video, I felt excited listening to what Snyder was planning, but frustrated that we're never gonna get it. And realistically, guys, we're never gonna get it. That's the reality of this situation. It's just really, really upsetting for me listening to that, because for me, it was all fantastic. It was all exciting, giving Superman that huge arc of Man of Steel, of BVS, of the Justice League trilogy, and hopefully after that, a Man of Steel 2 as well. Now, originally they were going to do an MOS 2 where BVS was, but they decided not to do that. He also discusses that BVS was the huge problem. BVS wasn't a huge problem to you, and to me, it was a problem to the studio because it simply was divisive. That's a fact. Some loved it, some hated it. I'm part of the loved it gang, but it didn't make the money they wanted it to make. Man of Steel didn't make the money they wanted it to make. That's why Batman was introduced so early in basically what was supposed to be a Man of Steel sequel, and there's where the problems arrived from. I'd love to know what you think of that Bullets and Blockbuster piece of content. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was really, really informative. It just is very, very sad because, as I say, those plans were brilliant. Having the Riddler in Justice League 2 decipher the anti-life equation. Genius. Have him kill himself after having to do that. Brilliant. Having Lex Luthor sacrifice himself because he doesn't want to see the world be destroyed by Darkseid. If you look at his arc from BVS to that would have been brilliant. I've always said Jesse Eisenberg is one of the great actors of our generation. I like the direction they went with Lex, with Eisenberg. I don't mind things being different as long as they're creative and interesting. So very, very sad that we're never going to get to see that.